Thanks, everyone. Welcome to our first webinar of a webinar series that we're looking to start as the Women's Legal Center. My name is Lulama Shongwe. I am a candidate attorney at the Women's Legal Center. As you have heard, we've done slight introductions. I'll just name our speakers again, and then I'll get right into the questions. Just some notes on etiquette. All of the attendees have been muted, but you can raise your hand and you can type in the chat box with questions and comments. You can also use the specific Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask specific questions to specific speakers. We will not be taking questions throughout the conversation, but we will have a specific Q&A session towards the end of the conversation, and I will try my very best to make sure that everyone's questions are answered. And so with that, just to name our speakers, we have Caroline Peters on the line. We have Nandi Vangam Kijima on the line. We have Siham Samai, who is my director at the Women's Legal Center. We have Wendy Pakir, and we also have Henrietta Abrams as our speakers. So what's going to happen is that I have three main questions about food security and the work that has been done around food security. There's a lot that's going on right now, and I'm not sure that everyone is aware. And so that's why the first question is, what has the work, so what work was being done in South Africa from all our speakers in terms of working in the sector of food security or any of their activism before the lockdown happened? Because I think we all know that our speakers had things going on, and some of them were specifically involved in food security in Cape Town. But what was the situation like before lockdown? So I'll just start with Caroline, if you could please answer that question for us.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning, sisters. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, I
okay,
can.
Cool. So prior to COVID-19 or lockdown, 2018, at the time, remember there was the children were disappearing. There was a lot of trafficking happening at the time. And my huge, and a lot of gangsterism was rife at the time. It seems like the communities were angry, and there was something happening in the communities that was very, scary or yeah. Anyway, so 2018, I decided then, especially around the trafficking with children in the roads and streets, we decided to start feeding, because at that stage there was a lot of children running around. And in fact, we started just with the little children, like bread and things in the afternoon. And then I had this conversation with my dear sister Avril in Hanover Park, and I told her what was happening in my heart. Also, I need to feed myself. And Avril had this, and I said to her, I just feel like people are hungry. In fact, angry and hungry. And I said to her, this was on my heart. She says, yes, that was the same thing she felt. The next day we started with a 40-liter pot of soup and bread, And so this was 2018, prior to lockdown. And then we fast forward. So lots of shooting, gangsterism, trafficking happened. And that was 2018 when we started. So at this time, I mean, the first pot of food, where we just stood outside the door, and it was served within minutes. And that's how our feeding started. And then the drive for stationery for children. We started doing sanitary towels to keep girls in school. And so though very small scale started, and then of course right till today, where we serve 600 liters of food daily. So yeah, that was us prior to lockdown. And what I want to add is that because of my work with GBV, sometimes
Caroline, Wendy?
I think that maybe we can just move on to some of the other speakers.
Yeah.
Mama, and
Wendy?
just be able to look at some of those challenges.
Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much. I'm very honored to be here. I represent two organizations, Ubuntu Rural Women and Youth Movement, and also Sisterhood Girl, Child, and Teen Girl Movement. Now, both is very young, in our infant stages, but we, our work started in Elsenburg, in Klapmuts, in some rural communities 8 years ago. That's for Ubuntu. And 6 years ago, we started our project with young teens and the girl children. So what we did in Klapmuts, because we're an advice office, that's our core work. It's to be an advice office and a referral organization. We deal with rights violations on a daily basis. We deal with gender-based violence matters. We deal with unfair dismissals, unfair labor practices, and mass evictions and displacements on farms. And you know, when people lose their jobs, there's a loss of income. When people are displaced, there's so many social ills, there's so many problems. I mean, people's right to dignity, they're deprived of that. And that's why as an organization, we felt the need to make sure that people have food to eat, even in the times when they lose their jobs or they lose their incomes. So we started a project in Klapmuts and also Elsenburg, like a weekly soup kitchen. And because Ubuntu was never funded by any formal organization, the women who are mostly unemployed would club together. We would buy the soup mix and all the ingredients that would go into 2 to 4 pots of soups. I mean, that's what we could give to very large communities. And then we would go to the clinics, we would go to SASA points on a Tuesday and various points in the communities. And then we would educate people. Because we always felt that we can't just give people a bucket of soup. We must couple that with education. And that for us was key. So we would go into the clinic, we would hand out soup, and at the same time, we will speak about rights. People's rights when they work, when they're employed. We will speak about evictions. We will speak about gender-based violence, domestic violence, the acts, and so forth. So that was very important. We also started a food garden in Klapmuts at the school, having a large portion of land growing organic crops, and we had 5 very committed women working in the garden, and we had 6 successful harvests. And then we could contribute some of our crops to the school. The women could take for their homes, and then some of the crops were sold in the community for very cheap. And we also donated a lot of the crops from the garden. But then we had a problem with water because we got grey water from the school, and there was a problem with the pipes. And then the last 2 harvests we couldn't have any, but the women just prepared the land now, like 2 weeks ago. So we're gonna start planting again. And then in Elsenburg, my community where I live, we have a couple of household food gardens. Now, many of the household food gardens started before lockdown, and when lockdown was announced, we saw the need to increase the number of household food gardens in our communities. So we worked a lot with social workers, Department of Social Development. We also engaged SASA many times. It was now even before lockdown. So when there was no income, in Klapmuts specifically, which is a large community, 20,000 people, we found orphans, boy orphans, no parents, no food, and then we would club together, taking them something to eat, and then immediately involve the social workers who would then take it from there. And we had many, many instances like that where we intervened and the women take from their homes and look after the family until social development come on board. Also kids that are malnutrition in communities where we could see neglect and abuse, we arrange for social workers to intervene because we believe in communities, and as advice officers in these small communities, we're often the first point where people come to when they are in need or when they have problems, and that is kind of the role that we play in many rural communities. Of course, we want to expand the food gardening into some other areas where we work, where we do advice offer support, where we deal with cases and so forth, but it's still work in progress. Thank you very much.
Hi, Nandi. Can you?
Hello.
Nandi, can you talk to us about the work that you've been doing?
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can.
Okay. My name is Nandi Van Namkijima, as introduced before. I'm kind of wearing, too many hats. Before the lockdown, and now I'm working remotely from Cape Town. My offices are in Johannesburg, working for Casual Workers Advice Office. Before the lockdown, I've been also working for an alliance of NGOs that primarily focus on land and agrarian reform. Basically, and also outside that framework of the world of work, in my community, I'm still continuing working with home-based care workers and waste speakers, creating a space for us, for women to actually discuss their challenges and see ways of organizing as women. And also, this was informed also by the research that I've been involved in around looking at issues, how women are surviving, and also how social grants are sustainable. As I said, I'm working remotely also for Casual Workers Advice Office. They're based in Germiston, and I'm here in Cape Town. I've been doing research looking at how women are surviving during COVID and also under the lockdown regulations. Issues related to, how do they survive in the absence of an income, as women who are employed mainly in precarious environments and also are unemployed as a result of the social impact, the socio-economic impact the COVID-19 has in the country. And the personal initiative during the lockdown has been that I've been involved in is to distribute food. There's a personal initiative, distribute food from my own coffers, but also with the help from the comrades in Manenbeek, Comrade Rusanda, who were also assisting these communities that I live with here in Philippi. Thank you, that's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Sis Nandi. Henrietta, can you talk to us a little bit about the work that you do with the Bondiavo Forum?
Hi, good day, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Like I said, my name is Henrietta Abrams. I work with the Bondiavo Development Forum, and we are a relatively new organization. If people can remember, in 2018 with the total shutdown movement, when we came out against the gang violence, as was mentioned by somebody before. So once it had the total shutdown, we worked on issues of violence, gender-based violence, and violence against children and our youth as well. So from that, our organization, the Bondiavo Development Forum, was formed, and our vision is to build a safer, healthier, and prosperous community, which means, and we're focusing on equality, the systemic poverty and equality that areas such as Bondiavo on the Cape Flats and everywhere else in our country is living, and how do we build people's power within our organizations to take back our power, not just from the gangsters and organized crime bosses, but also from government, business, and everybody else. So that's just the background of who we are. So we started to build block and street committees and organized ourselves in various block and street committees because we felt that that was the only way to go, because a number of organizations are working within their own little pockets, be it faith-based organizations or CBOs or civics or parties, that we're not speaking to one another, and we tend to organize our little interest groups and not the community as a whole. So a number of issues came to the fore, of course, within our street committees and block committees, and people had to go and find out what are the issues that's most pertinent within their blocks, and then we work out programs around the issues that's affecting certain blocks. Even though a number of the issues were the same, and as a forum we would then go on to campaign around those issues or work around the issues such as building safe safety networks for women and children that's affected by violence and so forth. And we've lent support to our women and children, sent them to our women and children, lent support in terms of advice, legal advice, counseling, linked them up with SAPS, DSD, sort out issues of neglect, issues of abuse, and all of those types of work, being the person on the ground and the person in the middle of linking our people to the various services they need. Of course, this work is a lot of traumatic work in itself, because one has to, our strong women within our blocks and on our streets have to be the strong people, but obviously their own trauma is being triggered while working with other people's trauma also. So we had to work with our women to face their own trauma and work through that as well. So before COVID, March 27th, I would say, we were continuing building people's power. We were in the process of having our AGMs and our strategic plans and planning for our Colleen Williams and Christopher Trutter annual Memorial Cup, which is soccer and netball tournaments for our blocks, where our blocks compete, and that is part of building unity, pride, and getting our children and youth off the streets. Last year already we've decided, because of the issues of working with women and children, we've had the issues of hunger. And last year we've decided that this year's June 16th tournament would have been, the prizes would have been for every participating block, which is 17 blocks that we are having. Each block will get 100 fruit trees, which we would have planted in various public spaces, be it in our streets, on our schools, in our parks, or on our sports fields and recreational spaces. So we kind of had before, even though last year and the year before we did not focus on food security, we kind of wanted to go in that direction. And then, of course, 27th of March, lockdown level 5 happened, and we had to stop there and revert our programs to focus on the needs of them. But I think we will discuss that in the next question. I'll leave it for there now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Henrietta. Just to then move on swiftly to the next question, we'd like to know what were the initial effects and the initial impact that the announcement of a total lockdown and then moving on to the different tiered levels of level 5, level 4, level 3, what was the impact and effect of that on the work that you guys have been doing specifically in food security? And I'll start again with Caroline. Caroline, please unmute yourself if you are muted.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Sorry, Lulama. Thank you. So one of the things, or can I just take a step back? I mean, for me, it was about food insecurity today, so I didn't speak. I mean, one of the biggest things of why we started was because of the gender-based violence. And prior to lockdown, we had the bridge. We started the Bridgetown Development Forum, like I said, in 2018 after the with trafficking and gangsterism at the time. And we had our weekly gatherings as the Bridgetown community, 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. It took us a year, but we closed down 4 of our houses, dens, drug dens. We went around, you know, going to speak. Initially, it was very peaceful, and eventually it got to breaking down these walkies and things that was problematic in our area. So this also started. One of the things that we also did was 30 of the women in the area went on to a food gardening program. They then, so there's 30 women that was equipped with gardening equipment, and that was our food security program as well. You know, so after this, so once lockdown happened, there was already a development forum that was active, our food gardening program that was active, the school program. And that's why when level 5 happened, there was no more contact with these groups. And I think after after day 5, I think Bridgetown was only quiet on the first few days when you really saw no one in the streets. Now and again, people would be walking around. By day 4 or 5, you could see clearly the movement, that people were moving around. There were more people in the roads, in the streets, and people would come knocking here. Is there no food? You know, and initially, I felt like they shouldn't be outside. We're going to infect each other. And then so it started with level 5 on day 4, people coming around for food. We then decided as the forum to start, and that's why on day 6, when we served our first meal, it was from an open space at the community center. You know, each one cooked, and we went to the community center. We served it in the open. And I mean, like I said, because of reasons, remember at this stage, there was no one infected yet in our area. And so we wanted to keep it that way. And we then on level 5 started seeing yes, like I said, from day 5. So we started feeding from the community center. And in that queue, what happened in that queue was I saw the first woman, a woman standing there in tears in the queue. And that is when the support group started for me at level 5. Remember, at this stage, there was no access to women that was in violent relationships. The only time we saw the women was when they come and collect the food. And this gave us access to the women in the queue, firstly to come and... Initially, everyone was scared to walk around because at that stage, they were still getting fines for walking around. And so our only access to women at the stage was women in the queues that came for food. And this is, so day 7, I meet the first woman that I would then start a support group with from the garage of my home. And also this is how I realized, and then the ones, you know, the one said to the other one, go to Kala or because yes, and then, so from the feeding scheme, that was the only access, like I said, I'm sorry, man, I'm stuttering, but that was the only access I've had to women. We then started the support group, and from this group or from the feeding scheme, I had Avril again calling me from Hanover Park. There's a woman sitting outside a feeding scheme that said she's not going home. She's going to sit there. It's safer sitting outside. That woman, I then went to fetch in Hanover Park. She sat here all day. We got her into a shelter by the evening. 2 other women in our queue, we got into shelters. Lots of GBV cases. So the feeding schemes was became then a point for women also to call to be safe. From that, we got, I mean, protection orders. There was the rape case at Women Legal Center then, you know, so that's when we really saw that the violence in the homes have moved inside, you know, so because women were locked down with their perpetrators. And this started the network of the GBV COVID-19 network and Women's Legal Center. I mean, I could contact Siam with problems or what was happening. There was Claudia Lopez, Heinrich Bull, and so our network started off just responding to women in violent relationships. Women, I mean, there were so many cases. It's too much to mention, but there were those cases that we worked together as a collective to have women placed in shelters. We then also realized that the Gender-Based Violence Command Center was not accessible to women. The gender-based, and I mean, this all started, I know we're speaking food insecurity, but this all happened because of food insecurity. Women often were sent to go and stand in different queues during the day, but it was also a means. Women then had to hustle for money for drugs, for their partners that would be at home waiting on them to come from the food kitchens with money. Not only for food, but also for drugs. So yeah, that is just, and then of course when level 3 happened, we saw how violence escalated because of the unbanning of the alcohol. Yeah, thank you Lulama.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Wendy, can you talk to us about some initial effects and impact that you experienced in your community?
Yes, thank you very much, Lulama. Yeah, I mean, there were severe impacts in many rural communities. When the president announced lockdown, I mean, the first seasonal workers in Stellenbosch were laid off in that same week, but they were supposed to work until the harvest end, which means it was a sudden employment contract ending and leaving 22 vulnerable workers whose only income is the salary they earn on the farm. But the permanent workers were still in employment, and because they live in Westbank and other farms in Stellenbosch, the farmer said that traveling to the farm would be a problem. It happened in Ceres, it happened in Worcester with 20 other workers in Worcester who works on a farm in Worcester, but they live in another town, also in Worcester. And some of their contracts were terminated immediately. I'm just referring 3 workplaces, but there were many others in Tilbach. Tarzan Soos was another place, not a farm. They sell soos. So 4 workplaces that had lots of workers that were laid off now during the lockdown period. So we became involved in the forced leave because they were put on forced leave without pay. And then in the Ceres one, there was the first intervention and the workers were reinstated the week after. So they were at home for a week, and then we engaged the employer and we said, but this is an unfair labor practice, because when the Minister of Labor put out regulations, they said, actually the minister put workers at the mercy of the employers. And for us, that was problematic because there needed to be clearer directives to tell employer that when you put an employee on leave, you must pay the employee because they're not going on leave on their own. It's because the employer feels that is what should happen. We got a case in Kulanov at a garage, a Celtic garage. Workers been put on short time, working 1 day per week. And the only salary they got was that 1 day salary per week. We had men calling, women calling, permanent workers calling, seasonal workers calling, across sectors. It was so many calls on a day, and the demand to respond became so high and all of that. So that all had its impacts, even on the persons dealing with the cases. And we had to respond because the workers were calling, they were at home, they had no food, they had no income, they were insecure at the time. And the employer at the Celtic garage told us that he has no guarantee that government's going to give his money back. So he cannot take the risk by paying his employees and then put in an application to the TERS fund, having no guarantee. And that is the challenges that we face with many, many employers in many, many communities that we engage. So we started to respond to these, and then we were very fortunate to get food hampers from a range of organizations, and Ubuntu Sisterhood, and also partnered with Colors Foundation, with Comrade Caroline, and we took a trip to Worcester to those workers I spoke of now who lost it, who were put off because the farmer put them off, and they didn't even, this farmer didn't even deduct unemployment insurance, no UIF. So we reported this employer to the Department of Labor, but we could go out to these workers while tackling the labor matter. We went and we gave them food hampers, a box of food with vegetables, potatoes, onions, and some other veggies as well. We went to Agter Witzenberg in Ceres, where seasonal workers' contracts were also terminated. We reached several women in the Agter Witzenberg area. We went to Hermon, we went to Wellington, we went to farms in Stellenbosch. And that for me was a really great partnership, because we could tackle the labor matter. And at the same time, when we go, we could speak to people, and we could also make sure they've got some food to eat whilst we're dealing with the unfair labor practices and so forth. But we also had partnerships with other organizations. 1000 Women Unite, they got us lovely fish from the West Coast. And on Youth Day, we could, with Latifa and Tina, we had a fish braai with young people, educating them, talking to them about gender-based violence, having both young men and young women there, because we need to speak with our men as well. And we use the platform to educate. When we went out to several communities distributing cereal to children, the children would come, the parents would come, we would do the social distancing, the masking, the how to greet, how to sneeze, how to cough. We would do all of that. We educate them at the same time that we give them the cereal, because we thought it's important. You know, you can't just go out so far out and then you don't use the time to plant the seed. And that is what we attempted to do in the communities. But there was challenges with us not able to access certain farms because of the restrictions and the gates that were closed. There were people on a farm in Stellenbosch, they could only go to town once a week on a Thursday, which means if your milk run up or your bread run up in the middle of the week, you cannot leave the farm. Otherwise, you have to sleep outside, like it happened with one person. He had to sleep outside in his car the whole night because he went out and he came back too late. Now that was some of the violations that people have been facing. I spoke to the Human Rights Commission in some instances to say we need a speedy intervention here. There's been a lot of referrals to the Department of Labor Centers. We've also engaged the CCMA on some of the unfair labor practices because we wanted interventions. And then now the evictions were quiet for quite some time because of the moratorium on evictions. And then suddenly last week, 2 eviction cases came to our office that we're responding to, and both cases are in Paarl, which means the farmers now think now that we're on level 3 or some of the restrictions has been lifted, now they can continue with their forced evictions and cutting people's electricity, constructive evictions and all of that. But we've been really, I think we were blessed as an organization, because without these partnerships, we wouldn't be able to make it. There's a lovely song I like, "You Are the Wind Beneath My Wings." When things were tough out in the field, I could call a sister, I could call Caroline, I could call maybe Claudia. There's Vinola that I work with in Sisterhood. There's many other sisters that I spoke to the CGE as well in terms of some GBV cases and restitution cases that we are working on. And then it's so nice to know that there's people that have your back, that you're not alone, because sometimes it takes a lot of strain and we don't have the luxury of debriefing. Now the debriefing happened with your sisters, or I would call Soraya Sali early in the morning, or she would call me and say, "Sister Wendy, I thought about you this morning And I said, you know what, when you think about somebody, you must just pray for somebody, because you don't come into somebody's mind for no reason. And that is the support network I felt that really helped us to keep going. I've also messaged Siam many times. Maybe Siam can recall, even very late at night, responding to GBV and extreme violence against women, where we had to go to the police station and to the hospital to support and all of that. So there was just this network of women that we could call upon, and also our partner SCIT, the Social Change Assistance Trust, and Heinrich Paul Stiftung, who have now come on board and support some of our work. And we are really, really grateful for that. There's lots of problems. It's not perfect. We didn't solve every problem. We didn't solve every dismissal. We didn't solve all the problems out there in our community, but we really tried our best within the resources we had and within the time we had to make a difference out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Sis Nandi, can you tell us about the initial impact and some of the effects that the announcement of the lockdown had on the work that you were doing and in your area?
I think, first of all, from a public health perspective, the lockdown was and is still the best response that the government, could initiate. And as it was necessary to contain the exponential spread of the virus, but it has increased poverty, unemployment, and in particular, food insecurity. It has increased anxieties because people were sitting now at home. There was no economic activity or no income. As much as the government, in its initial announcement of the lockdown and its response, it became clear that it was just rhetoric, because the food parcels, the bailout to the poor was never realized. And I think as we are listening to the sisters who are giving input, their involvement, going extra mile to ensure that communities are having something to eat at the end of the day. So the lockdown, as I say, from a public health perspective, indeed, we needed to have so that the spread cannot, of the virus can be contained. But what it did at household levels in our poor and working class communities, anxieties, hunger, people, food insecurities, and these have really resulted in antisocial behaviors. It has limited also that solidaristic, Ubuntu that our communities have, because we were not able to move to your neighborhood to get food, to ask for food. The food solidarity was not there as a result of the regulations, because people were not allowed. They would meet the army on the street as they were trying to actually scurry for food, go to their neighbors. What also during my research found to be highly, highly disturbing, the very same women workers that the state has relied on during this pandemic, workers who are not really valued, the healthcare workers. They would come back from their work as frontliners who are not valued, who are not respected by our government, come back into houses that have no food, that are empty. And as such, some of the women that we have been supporting with the help of the Manenbeck, Comrade Roxanda, were healthcare workers who would come back not having, and would be walking, long distances from where they have been engaged in terms of providing health services, come back into their homes hungry, with no money to buy food, no food parcels as they were distributed by the state, no food parcels. It was worse, to the entire communities that we didn't see, absolutely. So the lockdown in terms of containing the spread of the virus was a good thing. but it really, placed communities at a very, very, vulnerable and precarious conditions. Because once there is no food on the table, violence, the likelihood of violence are so high. Stakes of violence within the households are so high. And some of the people that I spoke to as I was doing this research via WhatsApp recordings and all of those things was that within the households, again, women found themselves to think as to how are they going to even secure something for the day, to wake up, secure a porridge, a pap, whatever, for the day, for the entire community. So the burden, again, of food insecurities was added on women who are actually so anxious, not knowing where will they get the next meal, how will they get the next meal, because of the regulations of non-movement of people going to the neighbors and getting food. So again, I think I don't want to go to question 3 because the state, we will talk about that the state's response was not, pro-poor in terms of ensuring that, poor and working class communities that have long been poverty-stricken, food insecure, no proper plans were put in place. There was no political will to ensure that whilst people were locked down in their houses, that the state ensured, the social development department ensured that they will be fed. No, there was nothing. It ended up in their coffers, in their colleagues, along the political party lines, those who were distributing food. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nandi. Over to you, Henrietta.
Hi, thank you so much, everybody. I agree wholeheartedly with what Nandi has just said. Excuse me. For us, just prior to lockdown, before the 27th, in fact, we found ourselves from the 15th of March already preparing for lockdown because we knew it was going to come. We just didn't know when. So we, in our various street committees, we've organized ourselves. We've done the education around how to take precautions, what the coronavirus is all about, how to keep safe, how to protect our vulnerable and immune compromised residents. So what we did in our various street committees is that we appointed block and street committee coordinators, and they had to go into the various streets and find out who our most vulnerable of our residents are, what the socioeconomic conditions of the place is. So should somebody need isolation, who should we take them out to, who should we watch, who should we feed. Then, we, of course, we haven't been involved prior to lockdown in food parcels and feeding schemes, but we have to remember when lockdown was announced as of the 27th of March, and by that time our people did not get their SASSA grants already. So we know as working class communities, we know what the last 2 weeks before SASSA grant is like. So we knew that our people weren't going to stay indoors. They weren't going to be safe because they were going to be scurrying around for food. So immediately we got out of the blocks, fundraised money. Unfortunately, we weren't in networks of, we're not a funded organization. We did our fundraising ourselves. We're not into the networks of people, funding organizations and so forth. We ran from door to door to other organizations that's doing food distribution, and we had to go through lists and all of those things. But we've decided that we as an organization will carry our people for the first 21 days and find ways and means to do that. So based on the databases which our street coordinators and block coordinators compiled, we now fundraised and secured food parcels and then handed out the food parcels to the most needy and compromised in our various blocks. We have also partnered up with Too Much Wi-Fi in our area, together with matriculants, to get matriculants data to go around in their blocks and sign up people for DSD, SASA assistance, UIF applications, and all these applications that we had to fill out for our people to get whatever grants or extra grants, right? So that was happening, and then we found out that the need was getting so much bigger, and people were fighting amongst each other over food parcels. You're giving to A, but you're not giving to Z, and you're being unfair, and so forth and so on. So in our 17 blocks that we have, we then, as we were in level 4, we then changed from food parcels to feeding schemes. So then we had feeding schemes 2 per block. Now we must also remember when we moved to level 4, under level 5, level 4, when we were having feeding schemes, there was also confusion moving from level 5 to level 4 in terms of the distribution of food and hot foods being served and soup kitchens or feeding schemes and hot foods. So we had a different interpretation of what the regulation said about feeding our poor and needy. We saw it as humanitarian relief. SATs, on the other hand, saw it differently, and hence we had a couple of cases, say for instance in Delft, where food was kicked over and at a feeding scheme where people were beaten with sjamboks for feeding our people. In Capricorn we had cases, so we had a number of cases in Mitchell's Plain also, where there was different interpretations of the regulations with regards to handing out food. And then on myself, through the coalition and Sheham and some other organizations, then set up a meeting with SAPS so that we could all get on the same page and get an agreement that SAPS won't act in such a repressive and just utterly rude and inhumane fashion against our people that is in need of food. So, and in addition to that, we also made a submission to the parliamentary committee on the issues of distribution of food and what clarity in terms of what the regulation said and how it should be interpreted. So what we then did was we organized our blocks. We continued fundraising. We organized our blocks, 17 blocks, and we have two feeding points per block, which means that we have 34 feeding schemes that was feeding between 3 and 7 days per week. Not everybody is feeding every day, but some are feeding 3 days, and some are 4, and some are 5, and some are 7. So then we quickly found ourselves feeding between 45,000 and 50,000 people per week. Our queues just kept on getting longer and longer and longer. We've used the strategy where we street coordinators should go and deliver knock and drop food for the sick, the elderly, and disabled. But even though we did the knock and drop continuously, our queues became longer and longer, which meant that more and more people lost their jobs. More and more those who were too embarrassed to come and stand in a queue now started to come out. Those people that we might have assumed that is not in need of food also came out and they're in need of food because lots of people lost their jobs. UIF wasn't paid on time. DSD didn't come through with any help and assistance. And if they came through, it was, in our case, for instance, DSD at the time during level 4 only delivered 50 food parcels, whereas we as an organization, unfunded, distributed 1,550 food parcels to needy people already. So then we saw that the food parcels and the feeding schemes, we can feed our people. It costs a lot of money to feed our people, but it's also unsustainable. So now we're at the point, so in fact, we've planned it before June, but June 16th, we kicked off our food security phase 2 plan, which is food gardening. Our people went themselves up in our communities, our people know where land is, right? We didn't wait on a government department or on anybody to come to us and say, this is the land that you can use A, B, and C. We went, we did our own talks with the churches, with schools, with individual residents that could give us a yard to do food gardening. So right now we are working on 10 pieces of land, building food gardens or doing food gardens, preparing the soil and so forth, to sustain our feeding schemes, including our school feeding schemes, right? So over and above that, we now know that even growing food is not going to be sustainable. Is not the only thing. COVID-19 has exacerbated our triple crisis already of unemployment, inequality, and poverty. So as communities, we have to take back our power and we have to do more. So by doing more, we've decided, which was also one of our former plans, and now we're putting a proposal together to also have block bakeries. So you have your block feeding schemes, your block gardens, and you have your block bakeries. That is what we're working towards. So now, because whilst we were doing feeding schemes and food parcels and all of those things, we saw that there was a huge price increase in food. Your staples such as rice and milli meal and lentils and beans, and sugar, there was huge increases. And we said, look, our people are unemployed, our people are hungry. We are not getting the funds from those, be it in state or bigger NGOs in the field. So we need to now see to ourselves. We have to take our power back, and we need to look at a different form of organizing ourselves and organizing our local economies. So for us, having the food gardens and having the bakeries, we will now, for instance, start building cottage-like industries where we employ our own people. So the block committees will decide, for instance, who will get to work in the bakeries. So there will be 4 people working per bakery, and we have 17 blocks, for instance, if we're successful over a year and a half period. So the blocks people will decide who will work in those bakeries. The blocks kitchens will decide who will work in our, should we get the funds or agreements with government, who will work and gain an income from working in a food garden. And then we split kind of it's a non-profit, it's for non-profit and it's for the benefit of our people, of course. So then whatever funds we raise, and if there's something that is a little bit of profit, then gets plowed back into the community, into another cooperatives, maybe. The next thing our women want is CMT, the cut, make, and trim, or seamstresses opening up and making clothes, be it, tracksuits for our school-going children, be it matric ball dresses, be it soccer team clothing, and so forth. Because we must understand that our people need jobs, our people are hungry, we can grow food, but we cannot grow clothes, so therefore we need to think in terms of developing our local economies where we're keeping a rand within our communities for the benefit of our communities. So we're talking about building people's power, but also building a local economy for the people, by the people, for the benefit of the people as always, right? So it might sound as a lot, but we kind of moving, and if others want to come on board, they can come on board, but we are sick and tired of waiting on government saying, we're not ready now, we don't have a budget, or other organizations. We're sick and tired of begging. So we're doing things for ourselves. If others want to come along, they must come along. We are propagating this, and we are moving into other communities and areas and asking them to join us in this form of organizing and taking on the system as a whole, because we have now seen that our government is bailing out business all the time. It is never bailing out the working class. It is never coming up with sustainable solutions for our people to fight poverty and inequality that is systemic with us all the time. So we will be sitting with the problems if we are not taking our power back, if we are not organizing ourselves, and if we are not looking at after our people economically, we will be failing them for the next 2-3 decades. So we need to overthrow this capitalistic state, and we need to work for our people, by our people. Thank you. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you so much, Henriette. You actually even started to answer my next question, which was, what was everyone's sort of interactions with the regulations in particular?
Hi, I think Lulama has challenges obviously with, and I think like many of you, in relation to just the network and the data.
The regulations coming out from the DSD.
Hi, there's no sound.
What were some of their experiences with handling SAPs? I don't know if Siham wants to.
Hi. Yeah, I think that Lulama again has a challenge, and I think that this is our first webinar, and I've indicated that we are still going to have many more, you know, coming from the ground. But I think, and just to be able to hear the voices of people on the ground. What I would like to speak about is the challenges also around level 4 and 5 from a legal perspective, and what we had to do to be able to ensure that the regulations relating to food security does not conflict with the broader regulations which actually dealt with the gatherings, and how you actually navigated that. I think it's critical that you actually explain how you navigated, ensured that there was a sanitization, ensured that there was, you know, social distancing, what happened in your homes. I think one of the major challenges that you faced was that municipal civics, etc., were all closed, and many of you actually dealt with or provided food security and food and home food through your own homes. And I think it's important that we speak about that. And then also now in level 3, what are we moving forward in terms of broader sustainability for food security? We do know that the consequences, as Nandi has indicated, Caroline, Wendy, all of you, Henrietta has indicated, the impacts and the effects of COVID is still going to be with us for a very long time. We have seen the impact on farm workers, on domestic workers, on those that are the most vulnerable. We also know that hunger has not been caused by COVID. You have all indicated that we know that hunger has been a major challenge. Pre-COVID, it is a major challenge in South Africa. It is one of the major challenges in relation to the inequalities. And we have also seen that those care burdens are placed on women. It is women that are on the front line. And it is women at the end of the day that is feeding. And it's women that ensure that their homes and their societies, as well as the communities, are safe. And we've also seen the interlink between the lack of food security or food insecurity and the increase in gender-based violence. And so there's still going to be a lot of discussions, but just from the Women's Legal Center side, we are a feminist organization. We are a feminist legal organization. And what we try to do is to be able to ensure that we are sensitive to the needs of the women on the ground. It's important for us because we need to be able to ensure that those sensitivities is also taken up by the courts, because if there are any challenges, we need to be able to ensure that rules, regulations, judgments all take into account the lived realities of women on the ground. And how do we do that? And the only way is to be able to work very closely with these women. In addition to that, what we have seen during level 5 was that in terms of the Gatherings Act was not the Gatherings Act, but at least the regulations impacted on gatherings, which meant that people could not move out of their homes. And we struggled for the first couple of weeks to be able to ensure that many of the NGOs and NPOs and community organizations have what they call the essential service permit. And what we have also seen was actually the conflict between the regulations dealing with food security, as well as the regulations dealing with the social distancing, and the impact or the SAPS's role in relation to that, as well as the SANDF. We first saw the first 3 weeks that there was a lot of challenges, because SAPS and the SANDF was tasked to be able to ensure that the regulations are being impacted. And what we saw at the beginning was people being chased away. What we have seen, that police, etc., going into people's homes and shutting down these food spaces. What we have done, what we then did as a broader collective, and through the lobbying and the advocacy by these organizations, both individually and also as a collective, we made submissions to SAPS as well as Parliament to be able to ensure that the regulations are actually read in such a manner to be able to enhance the challenges around food, not enhance, but ensure that we enhance food security at the end of the day. And we've seen that also in level 4, but I have to emphasize, it is because of the brilliant work of these women and how they have done it. And I think maybe Henrietta will also be able to speak about the guidelines and the recommendations that have been done by the Bonteheuwel Forum, and also if Caroline and Wendy, Nandi, so that we can speak about how you have done this in the communities. Like I've said before, that we will see the consequence of COVID for some time in our communities, as well as the challenges. And I want us to be able to build on the solidarity which Wendy has spoken about, and how we can build these structures within our community post-COVID, so that we can get, and that there is a social compact between government as well as those communities, government and the civil society organizations, so that we can all collectively provide food security for our communities, and in particular the women and the children. I see that Lulama is back on. Lulama, do you want to just take over the facilitation again? And I will attempt to just screen a video, and just to be able to reflect the good work that has been done. These are only the women that will be speaking on food security, but there are many, many others. They are in the communities that have done such sterling work, and we need to be able to appreciate the good work that they have done. Lulama, I'm handing over to you.
Okay, sorry about that, everyone. My internet connection was a bit unstable. I don't know if perhaps Caroline, Nandi, or Wendy want to speak about their interactions in their communities with the regulations. I feel like Siham has covered quite a lot of what the experience was and what the discrepancies were between the initial regulations in terms of the Disaster Management Act, and also the regulations that were promulgated in terms of the Department of Social Development. Do you have any comments in that regard? Otherwise, I think we should start opening it up for discussion with the broader attendees. just so that we can also get, maybe there are women in the ground who were also on the ground in different areas that have something to add to the general discussion. But Caroline, Wendy, or Nandi,
Yes, Lulama, I agree that we open it up to the others as well, to the other participants, just bearing in mind the time here. But I also want to say, as women-led organizations, we were often bullied, because remember, the food security was run by women in communities, and therefore these networks was, I mean, for me in this area, I issued every woman that was running a kitchen permit from Kalas, because we were registered before COVID-19. So what happened was that we then became the only registered feeding scheme. And so I then just would issue all the other women. We had Henrietta and Siam was saying, we had law enforcement going around trying to shut down kitchens, even here in our area, you know. So that is when we started to issue the other women. And I also feel, because we were all women in the community, we were bullied, you know. So but I think all of us do very much the same work in different areas. We do the same work that Bontierville is doing, but I like what we said, the solidarity. But I also want to even raise here that we should be working together in solidarity through networks. We should not be competing, you know, because sometimes on the ground it also feels like a competition. So this is no competition, because I know that all our end goals or all our objectives in our communities are the same. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Women's Legal Center. Thank you, Siam and Lulama, for holding the space for us. And not just today, but right since lockdown started, WLC was always there for all of us women-led organizations. So thank you.
Lulama,
Caroline, yes, Wendy.
I just wanted to add one thing. I think an important question to ask, or many people ask me before, are we not creating a dependency? I think that's a fundamental question that we must ask, but I don't believe that we are, because when somebody's lifeline, you know, when it's plucked, when it's taken away, like when people lose their job where they had a job before, or you become unemployed but you had a job before, I mean, they've got human rights. So giving them a hamper doesn't mean you create a dependency, but it means whilst they lost their job and their income, they at least have some right to dignity, and that's to have a meal on the table and to provide for their families. And I think that is very important, just to note, because there's all these things where people are saying you're creating dependency by giving people food. I don't believe that we are doing that. And one more important thing that I wanted to say is that when we distributed the hampers in different communities, it was women in those communities that identified the people who's going to get the hampers. Like I live on a state farm, and there's a couple of people in my community, like 30% who works for the state, who earn quite large salaries and who had income during the time of COVID-19. So when we had limited hampers or only for certain portions, the women would say it's a single woman who will get, it's the homes where there's no income and so forth. So it was quite a transparent process to make sure that we really reach the people in need. And our permits really assisted. So thank you, Shaham, because through Women's Legal Center, I got my first permit. And then we approached the South African Human Rights Commission afterwards to get permits for a lot of rural young people, because they've been assisting with monitoring the reopening of the schools, and also they're assisting people with applying for the 350 rand grant, and we're monitoring SASA points and some other points to see what is happening in these public institutions as well. Yeah. So the permits has helped us also in terms of the food distribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wendy. Any closing remarks from you, Nandi?
Okay, Sissy, thanks very much for the opportunity. Look, again, I think I want to talk to the regulations, the entire thing of the regulations. We're a country with acute high levels of poverty, unemployment, inequality. And I think with this lockdown, it is no doubt that the depth of poverty has increased and more people are hungry. It's worse, this includes children, 10 million children. So some programs which were introduced by the state have been withdrawn. The feeding schemes, the schools, 10 million children that have gone, without that, the program was discontinued. So again, you have useless political leaders who do not think of the alternatives in a country whereby they know that inequality, poverty, as a result of their policies. So they've really failed us. As much as we were adhering and we saying lockdown was necessary, but they have actually worsened the position of poor and working class communities. Again, around the issue of regulations, as we were saying, their response has been pro-business. I just want to highlight 2 or 3 things around that area. They have actually entrusted the bosses who have for many centuries been notorious undermining the workers. They entrusted them with this UIF, the TERS UIF. And today, this is the last day that the Department of Employment and Labor will be actually issuing those relief funds. Workers were robbed by the very same bosses that they were entrusted actually to apply on behalf. And when later in the month of May, earlier June, when the Department Minister of Employment and Labor decided that workers can apply directly, workers are coming back getting 35 rand or nothing from the department. So there's no political will, the state. And I think the last one that I want to highlight around the issue of food, again, we saw a state really that was so proactive in terms of, responding as to how they are so willing to assist business. The state failed to control food prices. It failed. We saw an increase instead on food prices. They couldn't put measures in terms of controlling food prices, no electricity vouchers for our communities. We saw our communities cooking, using alternative measures of cooking, wood outside, which is also detrimental to the very same health and respiratory processes. I want to say that, closing remark, that I think this period has actually indicated to us that we need to work in solidarity. We need to oppose these policies that are undermining the poor and the working class. The last one is the social grants. The social grants, we are taken for a ride, comrades. We are taken for a ride by the state. And all of these things, they actually fall back on the shoulders of the very same poor women who will be doing. Thank you very much. Thanks to the Women's Legal Center for actually affording me this opportunity.
Thank you so much to everyone. I think that there is a range of people that most probably have questions, and it's literally 2 minutes to 12. I'm going to try to open it up and to see whether or not there's any questions. Lulama, if you can maybe just read some of the questions that has come up on the chat so that we can just address that. I think it's important that we give the participants also an opportunity just to be able to speak, and maybe just to ask questions. I also ask that we keep it limited. I apologize for that. It is our first webinar, Voices from the Ground. And I want us maybe just to keep it down to a minute in terms of a question or just a comment. Thank you. Lulama, you can open up.
Yeah, we have a question already in the questions box. It's from Lorna Houston. She says, first of all, are we receiving any psychosocial support and debriefing? She says she asks because this is one of her areas of work. And two, she's also doing a lot of work with non-locals and would like to know if any of our speakers have encountered any people from migrant communities.
Thank you. Lorna, I mean, I will leave that open to some of the other speakers, but just in relation to migrants as well as refugee and asylum seekers, we have seen maybe there has been a major challenge in relation to food security and migrant workers, refugees and asylum seekers, because there was, I don't know if you know that at the beginning there was a problem around the regulations and whether or not the food security will be extended to migrants as well as refugees and asylum seekers. But those challenges were addressed by some of the civil society organizations, and then also maybe some of the others. We have mostly received also queries around evictions and asylum seekers and refugees, and those were the linkages, as people don't have a form of income, and we do know that will also impact on challenges around food security. But I think the women on the ground will be able to give you more information. Our interaction was more from a legal perspective. In addition to that, from this broader network, which we have tried to coordinate and to be able to ensure that we amplify the voices of the women on the ground. We have discussed, we have meetings every Tuesday from 7 to 8 just to be able to touch base. When they have indicated that our trauma, which I don't think it's possibly good, but we as a group of women, we try to hold each other in relation to that. But we have discussed that we need to be able to see how is it that we can provide some form of trauma counseling, mindfulness in relation to some of these discussions, as well as individually. And we will definitely start looking at making something much more practical for these women, as they're doing some phenomenal work, but it's a lot of traumatic work. And how do we do that? So we are also extending to people like Lorna and different organizations that will be able to provide the support, because like I've said before, the work of this woman is not going to end, even though we're going through the levels. Even when we reach level 1, it will not stop, because the consequences is deep. As Wendy have indicated, we have seen seasonal workers being retrenched. We have seen the not seasonal workers, farm workers being retrenched. We have seen seasonal workers not being taken back onto the farms. And how do we deal with that? Because we know that there's income insecurity that will impact on food security. And so I'm going to leave that and ask if there's any other questions from the various panelists. Lulaba, over to you.
If there are any questions, you can raise your hand and I will unmute you so that you can ask your question.
There was a question that I've seen also coming through the chats, and maybe some of you will have to speak to us about this. And it speaks to the broader sustainability also. We know that there has been challenges around food parcels and also accessing, for example, the 350 Rand. I would like to know from the different organizations and not just the speakers, how is it that you've accessed it? Have you accessed it? And what were some of the main challenges in accessing the 350, as well as the food parcels from the Department of Social Development, as well as other structures? Because what we have seen is that there has been a lot of organizations, philanthropy organizations, that have been providing support. But we need to be able to ensure that government plays a critical role in relation to food security. And how do we ensure that there is, some form of sustainability, because communities won't be able to do this type of rapid response indefinitely. We might be able to go on to October, but what else have been put in place, and how do we reach sustainability? That was one of the questions, and I've also seen that Chantal Witten has raised her hand. Lulama, over to you.
Siam, please unmute Chantal and then Maria. We've changed hosts.
Okay. Okay, so I don't know if some of the others, maybe Caroline and Wendy, would just want to speak to some of those challenges.
I think for us, sustainability, we've sent out proposals, but I think also, I know a lot of us responded to COVID-19. One of the things that I've also realized during this period was that we need to be compliant. We need to be PBOs. And I am very, we've done our application successfully. So I also feel like big organizations do get funding because they are compliant, they have everything in place, and we do not have that. So I would like to, going forward, that one of the things that we do on these webinars, Siam, is also that we make sure that everybody know what to do going forward to become sustainable. One of the things is compliancy. Whether we do a small workshop on PBO, all these things, the legal things, the financial aspects and those, because I think we need to be, we have to make sure we do that, because I believe that funding goes to the bigger organizations because we are not compliant. So those are the things we need to get in place to become sustainable, so that we do not go around begging everybody. Yeah.
Thank you, Caroline, for that. Chantal, yeah, you have the floor.
Thank you, Siam, and thank you to the Legal Center for hosting this webinar. So I'm speaking specifically now from a child perspective, and I have two questions. The first question is, what is the legal framework or the legal teeth that we can use for demanding a more viable food package for children and for women? Because firstly, we know from a nutrition point of view, you cannot provide adequate nutrition for 350 Rand. So I don't know where the 350 Rand comes in, and I don't know how we can argue for more. The second thing is that in the food and nutrition world, the presidency has the coordinating function for our integrated food and nutrition policy. Now, I've not heard any of the webinars that I've been attending, whether it's food related, this one particularly on the legal aspects, to hold government accountable, because we have a policy, and the policy has been around since 2017, and we have not called on it. So those are my two questions, and I believe that this is going to need to be enforced more, because child malnutrition, whether we like it or not, is going to increase, and the government has made many commitments to child health. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantal. I've got Maria.
Hi, thanks very much, and greetings to all of you. I firstly want to congratulate you because it's been really impressive. I think what we're seeing is this grassroots feminist movement, and I think that is its strength. Because I'm listening to you and you presenting, everybody has presented their ideas, their analysis, their praxis, their theory, their organizing, because I think there's so much talk in this country, highfalutin talk about feminism. And I think what is really great is how you're also democratizing the blocks. I've listened to what's happening in Bonteheuwel, how the blocks will decide how things get done, etc. And I think that is the strength of a grassroots movement, that it's decentralized and it's autonomous. So really, really great work. I mean, we would like, as Kanya, we have a feminist network, to be in touch with you guys. And, you know, we work a lot with the community healthcare workers. But really, to salute you, really, because I think this has really been great. And I could feel the passion and the solidarity. And yeah, I just wanted to congratulate you, because I think this is, for me, what I think a grassroots feminist movement means, that it's not top down, it's rooted in the bottom. And I heard each one of you and your stories and just how connected you are to the work that you're doing. And that you don't, you know, as I say, the ideas, the analysis, it's all there. It was just wonderful to listen to you guys. Really, really wonderful. A pep up, really a highlight in the lockdown. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, and also thank you for your thoughts, and also you know, it just build the solidarity. I think, like I've said before, this is the work that many of these women are doing, and they will continue doing this work. And how can we all collectively as women support each other? I think the fundamentals of this particular network is that we try to improve the social conditions and the economic status of women, but fundamentally it's to be able to ensure that we hold the dignity of women, and we also enhance their self-respect, and we build the networks in those communities to be able to ensure that those women can navigate, I would think, you know, almost like their own existing arrangements, and whether or not it's within their home, within the community, or within broader society. And how do we do this? Through these discussions, and by building truly grassroots organizations, which organizations like the Women's Legal Center can support, but at the end point. But the real work is actually happening on the ground. I don't know whether or not there's any other questions that we have. Lulama,
Yes, there are.
Hands.
Micheline has a question, and then someone from the Wraith Foundation has a question.
Okay, thank you.
Micheline, do you want me to read your answer, or will your question, or will you speak?
I can speak.
Thank Micheline, over to you.
Just very quickly, obviously lots of information is going to come out of this webinar series. It's already, this first one has been brilliant. At some point, we're going to start seeing themes. At some point, we're going to start seeing patterns. The reality is that civil society has risen to the occasion. It's inspirational. What you guys have done is inspirational. But as we go into webinar number 2 and 3, we're going to realize there's a need for knowing this now. For a long time, we have not been organizing ourselves to the extent that we're doing it right now. So I think a previous speaker also said, where are we going to plan small, short snippets of very helpful educational modules that will help us to organize in our societies? I just went through all kinds of struggle to try and get an NPO registered. And, you know, there are people who would have been able to make that a lot easier for me. So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, I think it's most probably Fatima from Wraith Foundation. Do you want to unmute? Lulama? Is there any other questions?
No other questions. I think the last one is from the Wraith Foundation, and then Wendy perhaps has an answer because her hand is up as well.
Okay, thank you. I don't know
Yeah.
whether, is there a question are you going to read, or is will they be in discussing it? Is the Right Foundation still on the webinar? Otherwise, we can just, I'm going to try to just unmute. I have indicated that you are allowed to talk.
Hi, it is Fatima Shabuddin here. Yes, thank you. Apologies, my sisters, I didn't know how to unmute myself. It is wonderful listening to all the reports from the front line. Of course, we're all stalking you closely on social media, and it's been very inspiring to see the response. My question is to WLC and really the NGO community, because when we engage with the women on the front line, the frustration with NGOs are very clear. And I do think it is an historical moment to call out the hypocrisy of NGOs who claim to speak on behalf of movements all the time. Cape Town is known as to be having a concentration of women's rights organizations. We don't see any of them in the COVID moment at all. So I'm asking organizationally or sectorally, is there a possibility to use this moment for accountability to ask those women's rights organizations, actually, what are you doing to support movement building of working class women? Because at the moment, and maybe I'm not privy to all the information, but from the outside, it looks as if WLC is the only organization in there doing this work. So I think if we recognize the limitations of NGOs, we know that women's positions won't change in our country until we build a strong movement of working class women, like the women we've heard on the webinar. And so I'm really just wanting us to think about what is the strategy towards that, because there's a massive amount of resources flowing to NGOs before COVID and probably after that as well. So if there's a way to try and use the moment to secure building a movement of women for women post the moment, then I think now's the time to act and to make interventions with those NGOs. I don't know if it is a convening of women's rights NGOs with frontline women's rights movements and say, how are we going to do this together? I think that's really all from my side. But thank you, and I do want to, I think, I don't know what the English word is, but emphasize everybody's celebration of WLC. It's wonderful to see an NGO that operates at such a high level, also understanding that as part of its core mandate, the work with women on the front lines is what's going to shift things for us. Thank you, Siam.
Thank you, Fatima. I'll respond, but can I maybe just give Wendy's hand has also been up in terms of a comment, and I don't know if you want to just answer some of the questions, Wendy.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I think there's a need that civil society and government reprioritize our development emphasis, because we are in this state now of it's still emergency, because people are dying every day, people are hungry, people are losing their jobs, the economy is shrinking, the budget is shrinking, so we must reprioritize. That's going to be very important. Government put aside 500 billion for response to COVID-19. So the role we should play is to ensure that it reaches the people on the ground, and that because we don't want state capture in this, in putting all this money aside now for to bring some relief for our community. So that's going to be a tight job to keep an eye and to monitor where the money is going, to demand accountability and so forth. And it's the same accountability that Fatima spoke of now, in terms of holding also our civil society NGOs accountable. Because it is true that very little money comes to the grassroots organizations. I mean, from April this year, for the first time after 8 years, we got a bit of funding. Less than 10,000 rand a month for the first months of April and so forth, which isn't a lot of money, but with that money we could make a difference, because we never had that money before. But if you've seen the amount of work that we did in our different communities, I mean, you would, maybe people thought we had a lot of money. No, we don't. We make a plan. We put money for petrol. We put ourselves on the line. We put our lives on the line and so forth. But the NGOs should play a greater role in terms of support to grassroots movement. We need psychosocial support. We need spaces to debrief. There's a lot of support we need in our communities, and that is not forthcoming. Just the thing on access to food, it's not a favor. No, it's a right. So even government and the municipalities and people's IDs numbers have been taken and all of that in my community, many communities, but the councillors never came back with the food. So we must also demand that accountability, because once you collect somebody's ID, there's an expectation there. And that's what we need to make sure, and even our local budgets, because we entering into adoption of our local budgets now, provincial budgets. There's the national budget has been reviewed now. There's a new budget, but we must keep an eye on all of these. And then just lastly, on the migrant women, we work with migrant women in club meets. Our vice chairperson, the vice chair of Ubuntu, is from Congo, and there's women from Tanzania in the community, and they've been part of our organization for the last 8 years. So we don't make any separation in terms of the women that we work with. I mean, it's all women, but we know that that migrant women are actually more vulnerable in communities due to maybe not having their papers, or they're undocumented and all these kind of things. And that's why we need to take extra precaution and protection to these workers. And as we were distributing food hampers in many communities, in Stellenbosch, we also found migrant workers on the farm from Zimbabwe. And when we reach out to everybody. We're not going to exclude any woman who is in need and so forth. And when you go to areas like Ceres, there's a lot of migrant workers, mostly males, but there is migrant women as well. So I think it's important when we say we organize women that we should be inclusive. And when it comes to rights and protection of rights, we know that some people's rights are violated more. It's the migrant communities that are more exploited, underpaid, and all of that, like in Franschhoek, a new where the permanent workers are now being replaced with migrant workers, and how the employers use divide and rule tactics, not to put workers up against each other, and so forth. And there's a lot of challenges there, and we need to think of ways to deal with it, making sure that there's jobs for the permanent workers on the farm, and also making sure when workers come from the outside that they are not exploited. But that's a really tough job to do out there, because we're not officially a union that can represent workers, but we do try and take these issues up as well. Thank you very much. I'm not sure whether I've answered some of the questions, but yeah, I think there's a lot of work to be done. And I'm very happy to see the women and everybody on the group that has an interest. I think together we can do so much more. There's so much work to be done, but we are committed, and we are in this to win it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Just with regard to, I don't know, I've seen these 3 participants that raised their hands. Fatima, I don't know whether or not you want to give a comment again, or whether or not it's been an old hand. Or Nandi, I've noted you. And then also Micheline. So Micheline, I don't think that you've, if you just, I don't know whether or not it's an old hand. But, and then also Maria, whether or not it's just, if it's an old hand, just lower it, and then I would know. If you still want to make a comment, then just indicate in terms of the chat. I just had Nandi, so I just wanted to make a comment quickly. Fatima, thank you so much for that comment. I think, you know, from the Women's Legal Center side, I mean, we try, we are informed, or at least we are structured in such a manner where we are informed by the realities of the women on the ground, and we try to be very true to that particular objective. But in addition to that, we also acknowledge that we are an NGO. And so when we create these broader feminist spaces, we need to be able to also acknowledge, you know, as civil society, as organizations, our own privilege. whether or not it's based in terms of our gender identity, whether or not it's based in terms of our class, whether or not it's based in a range of different identities which actually impact on the voices of women on the ground. And we need to be able to be conscious of that and always keep true to that. And so that is why this is just one of the series that we are going to try, and we're going to call it Voices from the Ground, to be able to ensure that we start including communities in these broader discussions so that we can start building our solidarity, in these communities, and to see how we can have, a true social compact between government and those communities. I mean, we have a lot of things on paper. We have the best in terms of a constitution, we have the best in terms of, for example, the regulations, etc. But when we see the implementation on the ground, it's only through a proper social compact that we'll be able to do that. But then it means that we need to be able to listen to the voices of the women on the ground. We need to be able to listen to the voices of the community on the ground. We cannot do this work if they are excluded. And so I'm going to hand over to Nandi also, because Nandi spoke about that the focus of government has been primarily around, business, etc., which came from a very good space. But what Wendy has seen, what Nandi has seen, is that we have seen companies accessing the turf, accessing funding. But at the end of the day, those workers are still being retrenched. And what does that mean? It means it impacts on food security, it impacts on a range of things. And so these discussions we will still be bringing to the community and to the activists, and to be able to ensure that we create proper feminist spaces and discussions to be able to see how we can support each other. I'm going to hand over to Nandi now so that she can just give a comment.
Okay, thanks, Siam. I want to repeat, thanks that you have touched on the community, because something that I've noted here as to how do we actually make these spaces, these technologically advanced spaces for communities who are directly affected. Thank you that we have actually noted that. And I do note that this is our first attempt also on webinar. Secondly, I think Ulona has mentioned something about women outside the colonial borders. I stay in a very, very poor community in Philippines, and about 4 out of the 10 people that I was able to assist from personal basis in terms of food parcels were also women from Zimbabwe, majority are Zimbabweans. And I think our movements must also, I appreciate what comrades Wendy is saying, and I know that they have been long in doing, working with women from the external borders. I think also in our communities, I think we must reach out in trying to bring these women, because they have been isolated. We have a system that has actually, and how much more of these women. It was very hard for them, especially during level 5, level 4. It was extremely with no support systems in place. So I think our movements must be real feminist in terms of how to also opening up. We as a socialist feminist movement. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you very much. We are way over our time, people. I'm going to hand over to Lulama. If there's any questions or queries, people, you most probably all have our WhatsApp, and we can continue having these discussions. And I look forward to having you also in our other seminars. We will try to, in the future, also stream it to Facebook. There's a lot of things that we're learning, a lot of things of how we are trying to push communities into the fourth revolution. We will also be having a discussion on maintenance. We will be having a discussion on domestic violence, on access to justice as the coming weeks. And I look forward to also, that you join us and also inform other communities and activists. We will also be having a very informative discussion around women and women rights defenders, and human rights defenders, which is both globally as well as in South Africa, and how the work that they are doing and that they are being, for example, persecuted, on different levels in their communities. And how do we support them? How do we keep them? How do we ensure that they continue doing the brilliant work that they are doing? So Lulama, I'm going to hand over to you. And I just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody for attending. Lulama?
Thanks to you too.
Lulama? Oh, Lulama must probably still have challenges. But I'm going to...
No, there's really nothing more on my side that I could say. We received just one more comment from our attendees about possibly sharing the recording for anyone who was not able to attend. We were recording, but perhaps due to some of my technical difficulties, maybe we did not get the full recording. But if we have a full recording, we will make arrangements so that the recording is available via our platforms. I wanted to share my screen, but I'm not able to. But our contact details are obviously on Facebook, Women's Legal Center on Facebook, WLC Cape Town on Twitter, and then we have our phone lines as well. Thank you so much to everyone who attended. Thank you so much to everyone who participated. We really, really appreciate the input. Thank you so much to our speakers, first and foremost, who have shared not only insights from their own communities, but also have started creating the space for collaboration across civil society as well as grassroots organizations, and also intra-connections. Thank you, everyone. If there's nothing else, then we will end the webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.